Lord Dunmore's War, or's War, War, or's War. Lord Dunmore's War or Dunmore's War was a 1774 conflict between the colony of Virginia and the Shawnee and Mingo American Indian nations. The governor of Virginia during the conflict was John Murray, 4th Earl of Dunmore, Lord Dunmore. He asked the Virginia House of Burgesses to declare a state of war with the Indian nations and call out the militia. The conflict resulted from escalating violence between white settlers, who, in accordance with previous treaties, were exploring and moving into land south of the Ohio River, modern West Virginia, southwestern Pennsylvania and Kentucky, and Native Americans who had rights to hunt there. As a result of incursions and successive attacks by settlers upon Indian lands provoking Indian war bands to retaliate, war was declared to pacify the hostile Indian war bands. The war ended soon after Virginia's victory in the Battle of Point Pleasant on October 10, 1774. As a result of this victory, the colonists took the Indians' right to hunt in the area and agreed to recognize the Ohio River as the boundary between Indian lands and the 13 colonies. Although the Indian national chieftains signed the Treaty of Camp Charlotte, conflict within the Indian nations soon broke out. Some tribesmen felt the treaty sold out their claims and opposed it, and others believed that another war would mean only further losses of territory to the settlers. When war broke out between the American settlers and the British in 1776, the war parties of the Indian nations quickly gained power. They mobilized the various Indian nations to attack the settlers during the Revolutionary War. Background: settlement and resistance in the Ohio country. The area south of the Ohio River had long been claimed by the Iroquois Confederacy, although they were the most powerful Indian nation in the northern colonies. Other tribes also made claims to the area and often hunted the region. Contention over the Ohio country was one of the causes of the 7 Years' War between France and Britain, which ended with France ceding notional control over the entire area at the Treaty of Paris in 1763. When, in accordance with the Treaty of Fort Stanwix 1768, British officials acquired the land south of the Ohio River from the Iroquois, many other Ohio Indians who had hunted in these lands refused to accede to the treaty and prepared to defend their hunting rights. At the forefront of this resistance were the Shawnee. They were the most powerful among the anti-Iroquois Indian nations. They soon organized a large confederacy of Shawnee Ohio Confederated Indians who were opposed to the British and the Iroquois in order to enforce their claims. British officials worked to isolate the Shawnee diplomatically from other Indian nations. When full-blown hostilities broke out within a few years, the Shawnee would find that they faced the Virginia militia with few allies. Following the 1768 treaty, colonial explorers, surveyors, and settlers began pouring into the region's Sea Vandalia colony. This immediately brought them into direct contact with Native Americans. Of the upper Ohio Valley, especially the Allegheny River, George Washington wrote in his journal for Saturday, Nov. 17, 1770, "The Indians, who are very dexterous, even their women, in the management of canoes, have their hunting camps and cabins all along the river for the convenience of transporting their skins by water to market." In September 1773, a then obscure hunter named Daniel Boone led a group of about 50 emigrants in the first attempt by white colonists to establish a settlement in Kentucky County, Virginia. On October 9, 1773, Boone's oldest son James, age 16, and a small group of men and boys who were retrieving supplies were attacked by a band of Delawares, Shawnees, and Cherokees. They had decided to send a message of their opposition to settlement. James Boone and Henry Russell, a teenage son of future Revolutionary War officer William Russell, were captured and tortured to death. The brutality of the killings shocked the settlers along the frontier, and Boone's party abandoned their expedition. By December, the incident had been reported in Baltimore and Philadelphia newspapers. The deaths among Boone's party were among the first events in Lord Dunmore's War. For the next several years, Indian nations opposed to the treaty continued to attack settlers, ritually mutilated and tortured to death the surviving men, and took the women and children into slavery. Early the next year, a field surveyor named William Preston sent a letter of report to the head engineer of the frontier fort construction, namely George Washington, which indicates his understanding of circumstances just prior to the outbreak of Dunmore's War. Fincastle, May 27, 1774. Dear Sir, agreeable to my promise, I directed Mr. Floyd, an assistant, to survey your land on Coal River on his way to the Ohio, which he did, and in a few days afterwards sent me the plot by Mr. Thomas Hogg. Mr. Spotswood Dandridge, who left the surveyors on the Ohio after Hogg parted with them, wrote me that Mr. Hogg and two other men with him had never since been heard of. I have had no opportunity of writing to Mr. Floyd since, though I suppose he will send me the courses by the first person that comes up. If so, I shall make out the certificate and send it down. This I directed him to do when we parted to prevent accidents. But I am really afraid the Indians will hinder them from doing any business of value this season, as the company being only 33, and daily decreasing, were under the greatest apprehension of danger when Mr. Dandridge parted with. It has been long disputed by our hunters whether Louisa or Cumberland rivers was the boundary between us and the Cherokees. I have taken the liberty to enclose to you a report made by some scouts who were out by my order, and which sets that matter beyond a doubt. It is said the Cherokees claim the land to the westward of the Louisa and between Cumberland and Mutilated and the Ohio. If so, and our government gives it up, we lose all the most valuable part of that country. The northern Indians sold that land to the English at the Treaty of Lancaster in 1744, by the Treaty of Logstown in 1752, and by that at Fort Stanwix in 1768. At that time, the Cherokees laid no claim to that land, and how they come to do it now I cannot imagine. Edited by Stanislaus Murray Hamilton, The Washington Papers, Library of Congress. Cresap's War. Among the settlers was Captain Michael Cresap, the owner of a trading post at Redstone Old Fort, now Brownsville, Pennsylvania, on the Monongahela River. Under authority of the colonial government of Virginia, Cresap had taken control of extensive tracts of land at and below the mouth of Middle Island Creek, now St. Mary's, West Virginia. He went there in the early spring of 1774 with a party of men to settle his holdings. Ebenezer Zane, afterwards a famed Indian fighter and guide, was engaged at the same time, and in the same way, with a small party of men on lands which he had taken up at or near the mouth of Sandy Creek, now Ravenswood, West Virginia. A third and larger group that included George Rogers Clark, who later became a general during the Revolutionary War, had gathered at the mouth of the Little Canoher River, now Parkersburg, West Virginia. They were waiting there for the arrival of other Virginians expected to join them before they moved downriver to settle lands in Kentucky. Clark's group began to hear reports that hostile Indian nationals were robbing and occasionally killing traders, surveyors, and others traveling down the Ohio. They concluded that hostile nations of the Shawnee-centered Ohio Confederacy were bent on all-out war. The group decided to attack the Ohio Indian village called Horsehead Bottom, near the mouth of the Scioto River, now Portsmouth, Ohio, and on the route to their intended destination in Kentucky. Few in the group had experience in warfare. After some discussion, the group selected Cresap, whom they knew was about 15 miles 24 km upriver. They knew he was intending to follow them into Kentucky, and he had combat experience. They sent for Cresap, who quickly came to meet with the group. After some discussion, Cresap dissuaded them from attacking the Shawnee. He thought that while the actions of the Shawnee-Ohio Confederates were hostile, he did not believe war was inevitable. He argued further that if the group carried out its plans, he did not doubt their initial success, but war would then surely come. They would be blamed for it. He suggested the group return upstream to Zane's small settlement at Zanesburg, the future wheeling for a few weeks to see what would develop. If the situation calmed, they could resume their journey to Kentucky. The group agreed. When they arrived, however, they found the whole area in an uproar. People were panicked by the stories of the survivors of the Indian attacks. They were upset by what they viewed as Indian savagery. Fearing for the lives of women and children, colonists living on the frontier flocked to the town for protection. Cresap's group was swelled with volunteers spoiling for a fight. Word of the group's arrival and plans had now reached Fort Pitt, and Captain John Connolly, the garrison commander, sent a message asking that the volunteers remain in Zanesburg a few days. He had sent messages to the local tribes to determine their intentions. A flurry of correspondence resulted, first, with the group saying they would wait for further word from Connolly. Before their message reached Fort Pitt, Cresap received a second message from Connolly that said the Shawnee, Ohio tribes had signaled they intended war. Cresap called a council on April 26. After he read Connolly's letter aloud, the assembly declared war against the Indians. After spotting some Indian canoes on the river the next day, settlers chased them 15 miles 24 km downriver to Pipe Creek. Their settlers engaged them in battle, with a few casualties on each side. The following day, Clark's party abandoned the original idea of proceeding to Kentucky. Expecting retaliation, they broke camp and moved with Cresap's men to his headquarters at Redstone Old Fort. The Yellow Creek Massacre. Immediately after the Pipe Creek attack, settlers killed relatives of the Mingo leader Logan. Up until this point, Logan had expressed peaceful intentions toward the settlers. He and his hunting party were camped on the west bank of the Ohio at Yellow Creek. On April 30, some members of the hunting party Logan was not among them crossed the river to the cabin of Joshua Baker, a settler and rum trader. The visiting Mingo included Logan's younger brother, commonly known as John Petty, and two closely related women. The younger woman was pregnant and also had an infant girl with her. The father of both these children was John Gibson, a well-known trader. Once the group was inside Baker's cabin, some 30 frontiersmen, led by Daniel Greathouse, suddenly crowded in and killed all the visitors except the infant. When Logan heard of the massacre, he was led to believe that Cresap, not Greathouse, was the man responsible for attack. However, many people familiar with the incident, including Clark, knew that Greathouse and his men were the ones who had killed the party. Settlers along the frontiers realized that these killings were likely to provoke the remaining Indian nations of the Ohio country to attack. Settlers remaining on the frontier immediately sought safety, either in blockhouses or by fleeing eastward across the Monongahela River. Many even traveled back across the Allegheny Mountains. Their fear was well-founded. Logan and small parties of Shawnee and Mingo soon began striking at frontier settlers in revenge for the murders at Yellow Creek. Dunmores Expedition. Mobilization and movements. Early in May 1774, Dunmore received word that fighting had begun at Yellow Creek and other points on the Ohio. He requested the legislature to authorize general militia forces and fund a volunteer expedition into the Ohio River Valley. According to historians Eric Hinderaker and Peter C. Mancall in At the Edge of Empire 2003, with the new forces, Dunmore advanced toward the Ohio, where he split his force into two groups. One would move down the Ohio from Fort Pitt, now Pittsburgh, 1,700 men led by him, and another body of 800 troops under Colonel Andrew Lewis would travel from Camp Union, now Lewisburg, West Virginia, with the two forces rendezvousing at the mouth of the Great. Under this general plan, Dunmore traveled to Fort Pitt and duly proceeded with his forces down the Ohio. On September 30, he arrived at Fort Fincastle, later Fort Henry. The force under Lewis, now 1,100 strong, proceeded from Camp Union to the headwaters of the Kanawha. From there, he continued downriver to the appointed rendezvous, reaching the river's mouth October 6, where he established Camp Pleasant, soon to be known as Point Pleasant. Not finding Dunmore there, he sent messengers up the Ohio to meet him and tell him of the arrival. On October 9, Dunmore sent a dispatch announcing his plans to proceed to the Shawnee towns on the Scioto. He ordered Louis to cross the Ohio and meet him at the Shawnee towns. Battle of Point Pleasant. On October 10, before Louis began crossing the Ohio, he and his force were surprised by warriors under Chief Cornstalk. The Battle of Point Pleasant raged nearly all day and descended into hand-to-hand combat. Louis's army suffered about 215 casualties, of whom 75 were killed, including Louis's brother, and 140 wounded. His forces defeated the Ohio Confederacy warriors, who retreated across the Ohio, having lost about 40 warriors. Captain George Matthews of the Virginia militia was credited with a flanking maneuver that initiated Cornstalk's retreat. Treaty of Camp Charlotte. Dunmore and Louis advanced from their respective points into Ohio to within 8 miles 13 km of the Shawnee towns of Pickaway Plains, present Pickaway County, Ohio, on the Scioto. Here they erected the temporary Camp Charlotte on Sapo Creek and met with Cornstalk to begin peace negotiations. By the terms of the Treaty of Camp Charlotte, 19 October 1774, the Shawnee agreed to cease hunting south of the Ohio and to discontinue harassment of travelers on the river. Although Chief Logan said he would cease fighting, he would not attend the formal peace talks. It was here that an agent of Chief Logan, possibly Simon Girty, recited a speech by Logan which became one of the most famous speeches in Indian and Ohio history, dubbed Logan's Lament. After the Mingo refused to accept the terms, Major William Crawford attacked their village of Seekonk, Salt Lick Town, near present Steubenville, Ohio. His force of 240 men destroyed the village. These operations, and the submission of the Shawnee at Camp Charlotte, virtually closed the war. Fort Gower resolves. In early November 1774, the army of Virginians arrived back at the point of land formed by confluence of the Ohio and Hocking rivers and to the makeshift base camp they had established several weeks earlier, named Fort Gower, so named for Earl Gower, a British lord. There they were informed that the Continental Congress in Philadelphia had enacted a boycott of English goods in response to the coercive acts. Recognizing the significance of what was essentially an act of rebellion, the Virginians, in a declaration of the increasing spirit of independence among the colonists, addressing King George and their fellow Virginians, wrote and had published what came to be known as the Fort Gower Resolves. Among the soldiers present were many Virginians that later became famous in the Revolution: William Campbell, George Rogers Clark, William Crawford, Simon Kenton, Andrew Louis, Daniel Morgan, William Russell, Adam Stephen, and many others. At a meeting of the officers under the command of His Excellency the Right Honourable the Earl of Dunmore, convened at Fort Gower November 5, 1774, for the purpose of considering the grievances of British America, an officer present addressed the meeting in the following words: situated at the junction of the Ohio and Hocking rivers, 200 miles below Fort Dunmore. It is actually about 120 miles below. Gentlemen, having now concluded the campaign by the assistance of Providence, with honor and advantage to the colony and ourselves, it only remains that we should give our country the strongest assurance that we are ready, at all times, to the utmost of our power, to maintain and defend her just rights and privileges. We have lived about 3 months in the woods without any intelligence from Boston or from the delegates at Philadelphia. It is possible, from the groundless reports of designing men, that our countrymen may be jealous of the use such a body would make of arms in their hands at this critical juncture. That we are a respectable body is certain, when it is considered that we can live weeks without bread or salt, that we can sleep in the open air without any covering but that of the canopy of heaven, and that our men can march and shoot with any in the known world. Blessed with these talents, let us solemnly engage to one another, and our country in particular, that we will use them to no purpose but for the honor and advantage of America in general, and of Virginia in particular. It behooves us then, for the satisfaction of our country, that we should give them our real sentiments by way of resolves at this very alarming crisis. whereupon the meeting made choice of a committee to draw up and prepare resolves for their consideration, who immediately withdrew, and after some time spent therein reported that they had agreed to and prepared the following resolves, which were read, maturely considered, and agreed to nemine contradicent by the meeting, and ordered to be published in the Virginia Gazette. Resolved, that we will bear the most faithful allegiance to His Majesty King George III, whilst His Majesty delights to reign over a brave and free people, but as the love of liberty and attachment to the real interests and just rights of America outweigh every other consideration, we resolve that we will exert every power within us for the defense of American liberty, and for the support of her just rights and privileges, not in any precipitate, riotous, or tumultuous manner, but when regularly called forth by the unanimous voice of our. Resolved, that we entertain the greatest respect for His Excellency the Right Honourable Lord Dunmore, who commanded the expedition against the Shawnee, and who, we are confident, underwent the great fatigue of this singular campaign. Signed by order, and in behalf of the whole corps, Benjamin Ashby, Clerk. The resolves were published in the Virginia Gazette Dec. 22, 1774. It was the first time colonists had asserted that they were prepared to use force of arms against the Crown to secure their rights, acts which, if executed, would be treason. These resolves were virtually a declaration of independence in Ohio by Virginia backwoodsmen 6 months before the shot in Concord heard round the world, and fully a year and a half before the peal of the Liberty Bell announced the freedom. Aftermath. Dunmore's militia then retreated over the Alleghanies, proceeding by Redstone Old Fort and the great crossings of the Yoaghany River to Fort Cumberland, and then to the Virginia capital. The peace did not prevail for long following this treaty, however. On March 24, 1775, a band of Shawnee, who apparently did not recognize the Ohio River boundary, attacked Daniel Boone in Kentucky along the Wilderness Road. And in May 1776, as the American Revolution got underway, the Shawnee joined renegade Cherokee chief Dragging Canoe in again declaring war on the Virginia colonists. These were the Cherokee-American Wars of 1776–1794,